Hello everybody and welcome to part 2 of our Q&A about the Renters' Rights Bill. I'm Hannah, I'm the Head of Property Management at Gascoigne Holman. I've worked for Gascoigne Holman for 10 years now and I deal with all things property management. Essentially I look after landlords and tenants once the tenancy's commenced. And I'm here with Rebecca, our lettings
Hello again, Hannah.
Hello.
Good to see you. Hello to everybody. Thank you for tuning in. I am Rebecca Whitehead. I'm the Lettings Director here at Gascoigne Holman, and this is our second video, our second part to a Q&A session on the Renters' Rights Bill. We're trying to answer all your questions and alleviate the concerns that there are within the industry and within our clients about this new legislation coming in. So yes, we're on to the second set of questions.
Absolutely, so I'm going to give you the first question. Please do refer to our first video as well, there's some brilliant questions on there. So if Section 21 notices are being abolished, how will I get my house back?
Okay, so I'll go into a bit of nitty gritty for you. So at present, if you're a landlord and you have a tenant in your property and you've got a tenancy running, there are two ways that you can regain possession of your property. There is Section 21 Form 6A and there is the Section 8. And those two methods of regaining possession of your property have been around for as long as I've been in the industry, which is 25 years now. The Section 21 6A is what we refer to as a no-fault eviction.
Mm-hmm.
So what it means is as long as the tenancy is not in a fixed term, the landlord can serve 2 months' notice and does not have to give a reason to the tenant as to why they want their property back. That is what is being abolished.
Okay.
So what will happen instead is all repossession will be via the Section 8. You know, don't forget, as an industry, the industry professionals are used to this. As landlords, you may not be so familiar with it, and the reason you're not familiar is that the 6A, Section 21, has just been so easy to use, but we're familiar, so don't panic. So the Section 8, what's the big difference? A Section 8 notice is the same in the fact that it's a prescribed form with some boxes that we fill in. And what happens with this is you have to give a reason. So you can't just write any reason. The reason has to be a ground that is specified in the legislation. There's 20, more than 20 of these grounds. Now, some of those grounds are mandatory, some of those grounds are discretionary. And what I mean by that is that there are certain grounds that if you stipulate a certain ground, a judge has to grant repossession of that property.
If it got to that
If
stage.
it got to that stage. The discretionary grounds are things that actually the judge can use their discretion because it might be something that is, for example, a breach of tenancy, and the tenant's breached the tenancy or breached a clause. Well, what does that mean? And is that sufficient enough for the landlord to be given possession of the property? But the mandatory grounds are the important ones. So what are mandatory grounds? I'll give you a few examples. One mandatory ground is rent arrears. So if your tenant falls into rent arrears, you can absolutely serve a mandatory ground for possession. Now, the tenant will have to be in 3 months arrears. That's 3 months in money, not in time, because rent is due on the first day of the month. So you don't need to wait till the end of the third month. You can do this on the first day of the third month, should that payment not have come in. And you will give the tenant 4 weeks notice. And after that 4 weeks, should the tenant not vacate, that's when you can apply for repossession through the courts. There are some other grounds that have been added in, and these are the most frequent grounds. This will be what's really bothering landlords. If I want to move back in, can I? And if I want to sell my house, can I? The answer is yes to both of those. So what will happen is you can serve 4 months notice and you can state either one of those grounds. You cannot do that in the first 12 months that the tenant is in the property. Now, actually in reality, that's not a problem, because in reality at the moment, you would be actually signing a 12-month tenancy anyway. So the difference is the 4 months. So in the current world, should you want to sell your property, you wouldn't be able to do it in any fixed term, and you'd have to give 2 months notice. So for example, we've got some clients who'll ring and say, oh, my tenant moved in 3 years ago, I'm in the middle of a fixed term because I've kept renewing it on a fixed term. I'd like to sell it, what can I do? And we have to say, well, you can't sell it until the fixed term's ended. Well, all of those people will be able to. So it's actually better.
And they've got the 4 months, they can start viewings for sales viewings, for example, at that 4 months, which is an improvement on what it is now.
Oh, absolutely. The 4 month notice period is definitely an advantage for landlords and tenants. What we've found since COVID is actually during COVID, some of you guys might remember that the notice period was extended to 6 months, and that really help tenants in terms of having time to find properties. What you've got to bear in mind is the biggest problem you will have is what happens if the tenant doesn't leave. What actually happens if the tenant doesn't leave at the end of the current 2 months, which happens more frequently because 2 months isn't long enough for people to find a property in a market where we've got not enough supply to meet demand. So actually the 4 months is going to combat that, and that's an advantage for both parties.
Brilliant. Fantastic answer to that question. The next question. Should I be nervous about the fit for habitation rules? Can the tenant make me do repairs that aren't necessary?
So this is an interesting question. I'm going to refer to you. The simple answer is, if you are one of our landlords and you have your property managed by an agent, you do not have to worry about anything to do with fit for habitation. This legislation and this whole bill has been put into place to protect tenants from rogue landlords. We don't work with rogue landlords, and hopefully there's no rogue landlords watching at present. This is really aimed at hugely dilapidated properties and tenants who are vulnerable. And so for me, the answer is, if you're a good landlord, no, you absolutely shouldn't be worried. But I do believe in the new legislation it's going to be really important to either use a managing agent, or if you're not going to use an agent, be really clear about how to document your tenancy, because those documented points throughout the tenancy are going to be what helps you regain possession. If you remember me talking about mandatory and discretionary grounds, if you were regaining possession of your property because it was perhaps dilapidated, some of those grounds might be discretionary. We're going to need some evidence. Now, we'll have that evidence, but you as a landlord need to. So I'm going to put you on the spot, if you don't mind, Hannah. As our head of property management, can you give landlords some advice surrounding that?
Yeah, I think what's really important, going back to what you're saying about documenting things, property visits are going to become the Bible of a tenancy.
And interestingly, it's the first thing people don't do.
Absolutely.
We find crazy, don't we?
Absolutely. I mean, I refer to property visits constantly. So we do the first one after 3 months, then every 6 months, unless we find a breach or a concern or whatever. Some landlords like them every 3 months, but they should be detailed. They should have photographs. They should be regular. You should detail the condition of a property, not just for you as a landlord, but for the tenant as well. You should be logging repairs on the visit report, and then those repairs should be managed and logged correctly. What I mean by that is, for example, if a tenant reports damp and mould, you need to, as a landlord, you have an obligation to make sure that that's reviewed quickly and that you're responding to that repair correctly. The damp and mould might not be due to the landlord. It might not be a building or a fault. It could be the tenants not noticed that the extractor fan stopped working.
I think that's a really important point, because I think our job as a managing agent, and the thing that landlords need to bear in mind is, what we've got to do is make sure as a landlord you're fulfilling your obligations, your legal obligations to repair the property, but also to make sure you're not overspending, because some stuff is a tenant's responsibility, not a landlord's responsibility. And of course, as a landlord, this is an investment, and you need that return, and we need to manage both your expectations and the tenant's expectations of who should be doing what. So that's a brilliant example with damp. Quite often a tenant will say, "Oh, I've got damp," won't they? And actually, when you then go and look at the property and on further inspection, it's actually tenant use. So we can help.
An isolation switched off on the extractor fan that's not been noticed, something like that. It can be just not opening windows, and some tenants just don't know that that's an expectation or a need. There could be a fault, but you need to find out quickly what the cause of it is and make sure that you're effectively completing that repair. Also as well, there will be tenants that request things that aren't a landlord's responsibility. The landlord can then make an informed decision, decide what to do next. Things like redecorating a property, how often should it be done if you've had a long-standing tenant there? Those sorts of things. I think that it's going to be really important that landlords, if they choose not to have a managing agent, I would say any new landlords really should consider that. But I think things like property visits and making sure you are documenting repairs correctly, because these are going to become really important documents should you need to serve that Section 8 on a discretionary ground.
I think as well, I pick up on you saying that one of the mandatory grounds will be rent arrears. Now, as a managing agent, what we will be able to evidence is we'll be able to print off an income and expenditure report, a ledger of when the tenant pays, how the tenant pays, more importantly when the tenant hasn't paid, if that's obviously the situation that we're trying to put forward to the courts. the letters that we've sent to remind them of it, have we contacted any guarantors, and it's that kind of information that as a landlord, if you've not got an agent in place, you're going to need to be able to document to be able to serve these notices.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really important. And I mean, as ever, we've said on the previous video, if anyone wants to have a chat or just some advice, we love the property industry. We want people to have good properties. And
we love a
good
pop
tenants.
quiz.
Absolutely, and we're here to help. And anyone can call us at any time, or any of the staff in our 23 branches. Okay, next question. So, how much notice will my tenant have to give, and can they give notice as soon as they move in?
Well, it's a good question. So, tenancies will come periodic. So, on the date that a tenancy starts, in theory, could a tenant serve notice on that day? The answer to that is a tenant will have to give 2 months' notice, and they have to give notice in line with the start date of the tenancy, so the next start date of the tenancy. So should a tenant move in and for whatever reason want to immediately move out, the first date they could give notice is the first date of the next month.
Yeah.
And they'll have to give 2 months' notice,
Yeah.
which means the minimum term a tenancy could possibly be is 3 months. Now, if you're a landlord listening to this, you're going to think, oh gosh, well, that's a nightmare because I don't want that to happen. That's increased costs, that's increased turnover on my property. What we have to just think is, how likely is that going to be? Tenants don't do that now. Why would they do that? Because think of the cost involved for a tenant. Why would you move in and immediately move out? So I guess one reason could be that the property was in some kind of state of disrepair, or there'd been, I mean, it wouldn't be a state of disrepair they'd seen at the viewing because they wouldn't have taken it. But let's say they've moved in and then there's been a flood from the flat above or something like that. Well, actually, great. That the best thing to do is end that tenancy. We would do that in this world anyway. The whole point of this legislation is that tenants want longer tenancies, not shorter tenancies. Tenants want longer tenancies, and they want that security. So, do I believe this is going to fundamentally change tenant behaviour? No, absolutely not. The whole point is tenants want to stay in properties for longer. I mean, our average tenancy now is between 18 months and 2 years. Obviously, that's slightly area dependent because some areas are a bit more transient with young professionals. But you're talking 18 months to 2 years.
Absolutely. And just hitting on your point of if a tenant moved in and they were unhappy with the property, it sort of reverts back to why I think property management is so important, in the sense that if you're a first time landlord, because of that checkout process at the end of the tenancy, making sure that property is ready so the new tenancy starts in the most positive manner. So that's just another point I wanted to just in answer to that. Yeah, and our average, 18 months to 2 years, we've got lots of families, so they're not going to be wanting to move.
Yeah, and if you think, who if you're a first-time landlord, who are tenants? Who wants to be a tenant? Pretty much anybody these days, really. Gone are the days that the only people that are tenants are, sort of people in their 20s who are, moving and have a transient, professional kind of lifestyle. We have so many families that rent. We have lots of people who are, 40s plus, who have just decided to sell their property, and they actually want to live. They want to live in a rental property and use their equity for something else. Yeah. So we have a lot of that, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. And I'm going to bring us on to our final question of the session. And the question is, will rents be capped? Will I be able to increase the rent fairly?
Okay, so there are two questions in one.
Just to keep on your toes.
So the first question, will rents be capped? There has been some talk in the government that they would like rents to be capped. At present, rent will not be capped. I don't think that's something that's going to happen. Obviously, there's some call for it. I'm positive rents are not going to be capped. What they have said, so there's two things: marketing rent and rent increases. So in terms of marketing rent, the thing that has been put in place is that you cannot, as an agent or landlord, you cannot take more than the rent that the property is advertised at. So at present, the rent may be advertised at £800. If 5 people wanted that property, it is usual that somebody would say, I'll pay £825, I'll pay £850, and the landlord's likely to go with the person that pays the highest. That's going to not be allowed.
Okay.
So should you think your property is actually worth £850, you need to market it that. And actually we'd take offers under, but we can't take offers over.
Okay.
So that's how that will be combated. And the second thing is rent increases. So rent increases will absolutely still be a thing. What's going to happen is rent increases will have to be implemented by the service of what's called a Section 13 notice.
Okay.
Again, that's something that agents are very used to, something that we use all the time. Just something to be mindful of if you've not got an agent in place, and you will be able to use those annually, and you'll be able to increase the rent to be in line with a fair market rental.
Okay.
Which is pretty much what happens at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see that being an issue. I do see that the process needs management. For us, it's something that we're really used to.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, Rebecca.
No problem.
So we will continue to do videos and keep all of you guys updated, but as ever, if you need us for anything, if you've got any questions or queries, please do contact any of our 23 branches and we'll be happy to help. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in.